finally, Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me bat clean up. Thank you to our witnesses. Mr. Wolf, it was a pleasure to meet you this afternoon, just for a few minutes. And as Mr. Jimenez said, I too admire your not proffered over principle kind of philosophy. In my district, we have a large nuclear and certainly a Department of Energy presence. We have the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. We have the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. And I got to say that the scientists that research and operate these massive facilities take very seriously the national security implications of nuclear energy and truly do respect the intellectual property rights. In numerous cases, though, I would say China does not share those same kinds of priorities. One example is with their interaction with the US-based firm Westinghouse Electric. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Certainly one of our world's leading producers of large components for nuclear power. Mr. Wolf, tell me what you think about China's nuclear energy business practices, and if they're concerning to you, how would you suggest that Congress could prevent these kinds of actions in the future?
I'm very glad you raised this. First of all, a huge admirer of your state. We've had great success building a company that played a role there at Hanford and ultimately in Fukushima called Curion that cleaned up nuclear waste. Great American scientists and entrepreneurs that did that. Nuclear, I think, is critical, not again for proliferation, but nuclear reactors. I don't think people really appreciate this. And I know, as I said earlier, we speak about AI and biotech and quantum. I think a vector or spotlight should be on nuclear because I think it's really serious, and here's why. US went from 104 to 93 reactors. We're down 10%. China went from 2 to 25 to 55, and they're on their way to 150. 5% of their electricity is produced by nuclear. It'll be 20, which approaches ours, but it'll be a much larger population. But that's not what concerns me. What concerns me is they're beginning to export the technology. And not for nuclear proliferation, but for creating dependency. You think about all the countries on the coasts of the African continent, all of the countries in South America and Central America. And the reason, as was said earlier by Congressman, that the idea that something is cheaper sometimes makes it more attractive. The Georgia plant that was done in nuclear here in the US recently, $25 billion. That's about $11.5, $12 billion or so per gigawatt. China is producing nuclear for $2 billion a gigawatt. So that's a huge contrast. If you're a foreign country, China could easily come in and say, we will build it for you, we'll finance it for you, and then, by the way, we've got you hooked for the next few decades on dependency on fuel and maintenance, et cetera. From there, you can imagine a speculating future where you're proximate to seawater. You could do desalination. You've got water resources and water wars. China's already doing that in Pakistan. I think we have to get our act together on helping advance entrepreneurship, free market enterprise in nuclear. Again, I call it elemental energy, but this is an area that we should dominate. And as you noted with Westinghouse, the AP1000, and many other reactors with a lot of other history, these should be the ones that the world is buying, not Chinese nuclear reactors.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you very much. I wanted to talk a little bit about critical minerals, and Ms. Gorman, maybe Mr. Evanina could have a response to this question. Certainly we know the United States, we were once a major producer of critical minerals required for semiconductors. Unfortunately, China is now the leading producer, especially for two, gallium and germanium. The ongoing competition for semiconductor supply chain resiliency, the US, the Netherlands, and Japan introduced export controls banning Chinese companies from buying advanced chips last year. In kind of a tit-for-tat response, China recently announced that they're placing export controls on these two critical metals, gallium and germanium. So are you concerned about China's critical mineral monopoly? Can you tell me what you think the administration, perhaps in some of their efforts to against this, have fallen short? And more importantly, we've got several efforts going on in Congress right now. How can we best accurately address this critical situation?
Yeah, I would say quickly that we've long known that China has a market power position in the refining and manufacturing and extracting of critical minerals. And these are minerals that go into all of our defense systems as well. So when we talk about choke points, this is a huge strategic vulnerability that we have in the other direction. And I think it's time we start considering ways to reduce that dependency, including with allies and partners like Australia, who have some of these supplies, and friend-shoring and creating sort of allied allied supply chains for some of these minerals where we depend on China.
In 1 second remaining, Mr. Ivanina.
I concur, and I look at the raw materials issue analogous to the antibiotics issue, and that we've made a decision decades ago to outsource that to China, which now puts us in a precarious position. And I think we're at a juxtaposition right now with that, choke point technology. We either are in or out of the rare earth mineral business, and I think we should be in.
Some of these things we can actually find right underneath our own 2 feet. So there's things we can do there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your indulgence.
Of course.